May 1945. The war in Europe has been over for 2 weeks, but in a small town hidden in the hills of southern Germany, one final secret of the Third Reich is about to be uncovered. Colonel Boris Pasch moves carefully down the carved stone steps beneath the Schlosskirche, the castle church of Heigerloch. His flashlight cuts through the darkness, illuminating dust motes that have hung undisturbed in this air for months. Behind him, his team from the Alsos mission follows in tense silence. They are hunting for something that officially doesn't exist: Nazi Germany's atomic bomb project. The church above them is 800 years old, its stones worn smooth by centuries of worship. But what lies beneath has nothing to do with prayer. At the bottom of the steps, Pasch enters a cave carved from living rock. His light sweeps across the chamber and stops. There, like something from a Jules Verne novel, hangs an aluminum cylinder the size of a water heater, suspended by chains over a circular pit lined with concrete. Cables snake from its surface. The air smells of metal and stale water. Pasch doesn't know it yet, but he's looking at the B-8 reactor, Nazi Germany's most advanced attempt to split the atom. In a few hours, American physicists will swarm over this device, and their analysis will send a chill through the Allied command. The Germans were closer than anyone imagined, but to understand how close and what it meant that they failed, we need to go back to a winter evening in Berlin, 7 years earlier, when a discovery in a modest laboratory changed the nature of war forever. December 17, 1938. Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Chemistry, Berlin-Dahlem. The laboratories are nearly empty. Most scientists have gone home for the weekend. But Otto Hahn and his assistant Fritz Strassmann are bent over their equipment, repeating an experiment for the 4th time. They can't believe what they're seeing. For months, they've been bombarding uranium with neutrons, expecting to create slightly heavier elements. Standard physics, predictable results. But tonight, their chemical analysis shows something impossible. Barium, an element that weighs barely half of what uranium does. Hahn writes urgently to his former colleague, Lisa Meitner, who fled Germany 5 months earlier when the Nazis revoked her work permit. She was Austrian, Jewish, no longer welcome in Hitler's Reich, despite her 3 decades of groundbreaking research. The letter reaches her in Sweden just before Christmas. Walking through the snowy woods with her nephew Otto Frisch, also a refugee physicist, Meitner works through the implications on scraps of paper. The uranium atom hasn't just been chipped, it's been split in half. The energy released, she calculates, would be enormous: 20 million electron volts from a single atomic split. Frisch names it fission, borrowing from biology. Within weeks, the news spreads through the international physics community like wildfire. In Copenhagen, Niels Bohr immediately grasps the implications. In Rome, Enrico Fermi starts his own calculations. In Princeton, Albert Einstein, when told of the discovery, slaps his forehead and exclaims, "Oh, how could I have been so stupid not to see that?" But in Germany, the implications are understood most clearly of all. April 29, 1939. The German War Office receives a letter that should have changed history. Professor Paul Hartek of Hamburg University writes with unusual directness for an academic. The newest development in nuclear physics will probably make it possible to produce an explosive many orders of magnitude more powerful than conventional ones. That country which first makes use of it has an unsurpassable advantage. The Nazis move with surprising speed. By September 1939, the same month Hitler invades Poland, starting World War II, the German Army Ordnance Office has already confiscated all uranium stocks in the country and banned its export. They've assembled Germany's leading nuclear physicists into what they call the Uranverein, the Uranium Club. And what a club it is. Werner Heisenberg, 37 years old, winner of the Nobel Prize at 31 for his uncertainty principle. Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, brilliant theoretician and son of Germany's second highest diplomat. Otto Hahn himself, discoverer of fission. Kurt Diebner, Paul Hartek, Walter Bothe, the cream of German physics. By April 1940, while America is still debating whether to stay out of the European war, Germany has established multiple research groups working on reactor design and uranium enrichment. They've captured the uranium mines of Czechoslovakia when they absorbed that country in 1939. Most crucially, when they invade Norway in April 1940, they seize the Norsk hydro plant at Vemork. the world's only industrial-scale producer of heavy water, which German scientists believe is the key to controlling nuclear fission. The Germans have everything: the scientists, the materials, the industrial base, and a 3-year head start. In the spring of 1940, Nazi Germany is closer to atomic weapons than any other nation on Earth. So why are they destined to fail? The answer begins in 1933, when Adolf Hitler comes to power and immediately begins purging German universities of Jewish physics, his term for modern theoretical physics, especially relativity and quantum mechanics. The numbers are staggering. Between 1933 and 1941, Germany drives out nearly 2,000 physicists, chemists, and mathematicians. 20% of all physics professors? Gone. 11 past or future Nobel Prize winners in physics alone? Expelled or fled. It's as if America suddenly exiled every scientist from Harvard, MIT, Princeton, and Caltech combined. Albert Einstein never returns from a visiting professorship in America. Max Born, who taught quantum mechanics to half of Europe's physicists, flees to Britain. James Franck, Nobel laureate, resigns in protest and emigrates. Hans Bethe, who will later figure out how stars burn, expelled at 26 years old for having a Jewish grandmother. But the most painful loss for Germany's atomic ambitions might be Leo Szilard. In 1933, the Hungarian Jewish physicist is sitting in a London hotel room, a refugee from German anti-Semitism, when he reads an article by Ernest Rutherford claiming that atomic energy will never be practical. Irritated, Szilard goes for a walk. As he waits for a traffic light on Southampton Row, the idea hits him. A nuclear chain reaction. If one neutron could split an atom releasing 2 neutrons, which split 2 atoms releasing 4 neutrons, Szilard sees it all in that moment. The bomb, the reactor, the new world coming. He files a patent and assigns it to the British Admiralty to keep it secret. The man who first conceived of nuclear chain reaction is working against Germany because Germany drove him away. By summer 1939, Szilard is in America, desperately worried. He knows German scientists understand fission. He knows they have uranium. With fellow Hungarian refugees Eugene Wigner and Edward Teller, he conceives a plan: get Einstein to warn President Roosevelt. August 2nd, 1939, a hot summer day in Long Island. Einstein, in a cotton shirt and suspenders, receives his visitors at his summer cottage. Szilard explains the situation in German. Einstein's English is still shaky. When Einstein grasps that chain reactions are possible, that a bomb could be built, his face goes pale. "I never thought of that," he says quietly. The letter they draft is a masterpiece of understated urgency. It may become possible to set up a nuclear chain reaction in a large mass of uranium. This new phenomenon would lead to the construction of bombs, and it is conceivable, though much less certain, that extremely powerful bombs of a new type may thus be constructed. But here's where democracy's weakness shows. The letter reaches Roosevelt in October 1939, 2 months after Germany has already organized its uranium research. Roosevelt's response? He appoints a committee. The Uranium Committee's first-year budget, $6,000. Germany is spending millions of Reichsmarks. For 2 crucial years, while German scientists work in well-funded laboratories, American nuclear research crawls forward on a shoestring. University professors conduct experiments in their spare time. The government treats atomic weapons as an interesting possibility, not an urgent necessity. Everything changes on 3 pivotal days. December 2nd, 1942, Chicago, Illinois. Under the stands of Stagg Field, an abandoned squash court has been transformed into something unprecedented. Enrico Fermi, the Italian Nobel laureate who fled Mussolini's racial laws with his Jewish wife, has built a pile of graphite blocks and uranium that reaches nearly to the ceiling. At 3:25 p.m., he orders the control rods withdrawn. The Geiger counters click faster, faster, approaching a roar. The world's first controlled nuclear chain reaction has begun. Fermi lets it run for 28 minutes, then shuts it down. His team celebrates with a bottle of Chianti in paper cups. Arthur Compton, project leader, calls James Conant in Washington. Speaking in code on an unsecured line, he says, "The Italian navigator has landed in the New World." "How were the natives?" Conant asks. "Very friendly." But there's a darker turning point that gives this success its urgency. December 7th, 1941, a year before Fermi's reactor, Pearl Harbor. In 2 hours, Japan kills 2,400 Americans and sinks or damages 18 ships. America enters World War II, and everything changes. The Manhattan Project receives virtually unlimited funding. $2 billion will be spent, more than the entire automotive industry spent on research in the previous 20 years. General Leslie Groves is appointed to run the project on September 17th, 1942. He's a bulldozer of a man, builder of the Pentagon, accustomed to the impossible. His first visit is to Berkeley to meet J. Robert Oppenheimer, the theoretical physicist who will become scientific director. Groves is warned that Oppenheimer is difficult, a left-wing intellectual who reads Sanskrit for fun and has communist friends. But Groves sees something else, a man who can translate between scientists and soldiers, theory and engineering, vision and reality. By early 1943, the Great Migration is complete. European science has fled to America, and America has given it a home at Los Alamos. Consider the irony. Hitler's master race ideology has given his enemies a weapon he can never match: diversity of thought. At Los Alamos, Hungarian Jews work alongside Midwestern farm boys. Italian Catholics collaborate with German Protestants. British aristocrats share blackboards with American communists. Hans Bethe, expelled from Germany, heads the theoretical division. Edward Teller, fled from Hungary, works on the hydrogen bomb. Stanislaw Ulam from Poland. George Kistiakowsky from Russia. Klaus Fuchs from Germany, though no one knows yet he's also working for Stalin. Niels Bohr escapes occupied Denmark in 1943, smuggled to Sweden in a fishing boat, nearly dying from lack of oxygen in the unpressurized bomb bay of a British Mosquito flying him to Scotland. They work 18-hour days in buildings that were boys' school dormitories 6 months earlier. Their children play in the same mesas where ancient Pueblo peoples once made their homes. On Saturday nights, Oppenheimer hosts parties where the world's greatest minds square dance to a fiddle, drink army-issue beer, and try to forget that they're building a weapon to end civilization. But they never really forget why they're there. Many have family still in Europe. They've read the reports of concentration camps, even if the full horror isn't yet known. They know what Nazi victory would mean. When Niels Bohr arrives from Denmark with news that Heisenberg is still working, that Germany hasn't given up, the work takes on even greater urgency. As 1943 begins, the race has taken shape. Germany has had a 4-year head start, but has made crucial errors. They've focused on heavy water instead of graphite as a neutron moderator, a decision that makes their program vulnerable to Allied bombing of the Norwegian plant. They've spread their research among competing groups instead of centralizing it. Most critically, they've driven away many of their best minds. America started late, but is now moving with the focused power of democracy aroused. 3 secret cities are under construction. Oak Ridge will enrich uranium using every known method: electromagnetic separation, gaseous diffusion, thermal diffusion, to see which works best. Hanford will produce plutonium in reactors along the Columbia River. Los Alamos will figure out how to turn these materials into a bomb. The scientists know it's a race, though they don't know how close it is. Every morning, Oppenheimer wonders, what is Heisenberg doing today? How far have they gotten? Will we be in time? What they don't know, what they won't discover until Colonel Pash descends those steps in Heigerloch, is that the race is closer than anyone imagined. The margin of victory will be measured not in years, but in months. And the price of losing would have been nothing less than the free world itself. As 1943 progresses, both sides face critical challenges that will determine not just who wins the race, but whether the weapon they're racing to build will end the war or end civilization itself. The next phase of the race is about to begin, and for the first time, America is in the lead. The question is, can they stay there? Picture 2 laboratories 3,000 miles apart in the summer of 1942. In Chicago, Enrico Fermi works in a squash court with a budget that would soon reach billions. In Berlin, Werner Heisenberg walks into the office of Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, with the future of Germany's atomic program in his hands. What happens in these parallel moments will determine the fate of the world. June 4th, 1942. The Reich Chancellery, Berlin. Heisenberg and other German physicists have been summoned to brief the Nazi leadership on atomic weapons. Speer, the organizational genius who has tripled German war production, listens intently. He's prepared to throw the full weight of the Reich behind this project if needed. How much do you need? Speer asks. This is the moment. The door is open. Germany's entire industrial might waits to be mobilized. Heisenberg could ask for anything. Thousands of workers, new facilities, unlimited funding. Instead, he requests 350,000 marks. Speer is puzzled. That's nothing. That's pocket change for the Third Reich. He asks again, surely you need more? No, Heisenberg insists. This modest sum will suffice for research. In his memoirs written decades later in Spandau prison, Speer would reflect on this meeting with bewilderment. He'd been prepared to authorize billions. He'd have built entire cities if Heisenberg had asked. But the physicist seemed almost reluctant, talking about technical problems, years of development, uncertain outcomes. Was Heisenberg deliberately sabotaging the Nazi bomb? Or was he simply a theoretical physicist out of his depth in engineering? Historians still debate this question, but the result was catastrophic for German atomic ambitions. While America was about to spend $2 billion, Germany would spend roughly 2 million marks, 1,000 times less. Meanwhile, in America, General Leslie Groves is performing miracles of industrial mobilization that make the pyramids look like backyard projects. Consider Oak Ridge, Tennessee. In January 1942, it doesn't exist. It's just 59,000 acres of rural farmland, chosen because it's remote, has access to TVA electricity, and the parallel ridges provide natural separation between facilities. If one blows up, the others survive. By 1945, Oak Ridge is Tennessee's fifth largest city, though it appears on no maps. 75,000 people live and work behind barbed wire, most with no idea what they're building. The security is so tight that husbands and wives working different shifts in the same building don't know what their spouse does. The scale defies comprehension. The K-25 gaseous diffusion plant is the largest building in the world, half a mile long, covering 44 acres. Inside, uranium hexafluoride gas pumps through thousands of barriers, each slightly enriching the uranium-235 concentration. The pumps alone require more electricity than a city of 100,000. The entire Oak Ridge facility uses 1/7 of all electrical power generated in the United States. Young women from Tennessee farms sit at control panels all day, watching dials and adjusting knobs, told only to keep the needles in certain positions. They don't know they're enriching uranium. They call it tuballoy, or the product. Years later, some will cry when they learn what they helped create. Others will remain proud. They ended the war. The Y-12 electromagnetic separation plant uses a different approach. Massive magnets, using 14,000 tons of silver borrowed from the U.S. Treasury because copper is too scarce, bend streams of uranium ions, separating the lighter U-235 from heavier U-238. The design is based on Ernest Lawrence's cyclotron, scaled up to industrial size. Each racetrack of magnets is the size of a baseball diamond. But here's the incredible part. It works. By early 1945, Oak Ridge is producing hundreds of grams of enriched uranium per day, enough for a bomb every few weeks. 2,000 miles northwest in Hanford, Washington, an even more ambitious project takes shape along the Columbia River. Here, massive reactors, each the size of a building, cook uranium to produce plutonium, an element that doesn't exist in nature, that humans are creating atom by atom. The reactors generate tremendous heat, requiring millions of gallons of Columbia River water for cooling. The water, now radioactive, flows back into the river, an environmental disaster we're still cleaning up today. But in 1943, winning the war is all that matters. Native American tribes who fish these waters for thousands of years are told nothing about why the salmon are dying. But the true miracle is Los Alamos. On a mesa in New Mexico, where the Manhattan Project's scientific director, J. Robert Oppenheimer, spent his youth recovering from tuberculosis, General Groves has created something unprecedented. A military base run by civilians, a laboratory that's also a town, a place where genius is concentrated like nowhere else in history. The roster reads like a Nobel Prize ceremony from the future. Hans Bethe, who will figure out how stars work. Richard Feynman, future quantum electrodynamics pioneer, currently picking locks for fun and calculating neutron diffusion. John von Neumann, designing explosive lenses while inventing game theory in his spare time. Edward Teller, already dreaming of fusion bombs while everyone else struggles with fission. Oppenheimer manages these egos with remarkable skill. He knows everyone's work, speaks 8 languages, quotes Hindu scripture and Western poetry with equal ease. He's everywhere, chain smoking, his pork pie hat distinctive across the mesa, solving theoretical problems in the morning, administrative crises in the afternoon, personal disputes at night. The living conditions are Spartan. Nobel laureates share walls so thin they can hear their neighbors turning pages. Water shortages are constant. The army didn't plan for this many people. The wives, many with advanced degrees themselves, are going stir-crazy with nothing to do but organize communal laundries and teach at the makeshift school. The isolation is intense. Mail is censored, phone calls monitored, trips outside require permission. Yet morale is surprisingly high. They know they're doing something momentous. On weekends, they ski on Sawyer Hill, hike in Bandelier National Monument, hold square dances where Hungarian physicists try to master the do-si-do. Oppenheimer organizes classical music concerts. Fermi takes bets on everything: the yield of test explosions, how long meetings will last, whether it will rain. But beneath the collegiality is crushing pressure. They're not just racing Germans, they're racing time itself. Every day the war continues, thousands die. If the bomb can end it sooner. While Los Alamos calculates and Oak Ridge enriches, a different kind of war is being fought in the frozen mountains of Norway. The Vemork heavy water plant, perched on a cliff above a deep gorge, produces the deuterium oxide that German scientists believe is essential for their reactors. Without heavy water, no controlled chain reaction. Without chain reaction, no plutonium. Without plutonium, no bomb. February 27, 1943. Just before midnight, 6 Norwegian commandos, trained by the British Special Operations Executive, approach Vemork. They've spent 4 months preparing, surviving on the Hardangervidda Plateau in temperatures reaching -30, eating reindeer moss when their supplies ran out. The bridge is too heavily guarded, so they descend into the gorge, cross the frozen river, and climb the opposite cliff, 500 feet of near vertical ice in darkness. At the top, they cut through a fence and enter through a cable duct that intelligence said would be there. Inside, they surprise the Norwegian watchman, who's actually relieved. He thought they were Germans. In 18 minutes, they plant explosive charges on the heavy water production cells. The explosions destroy 5 months of production, about 500 kilograms of heavy water. The commandos escape without firing a shot, skiing 200 miles to Sweden. It's one of the most successful special operations of the war. German heavy water production is set back by months, maybe a year. But the Germans rebuild. By summer 1943, production resumes. So in November, the Americans try a different approach. 143 B-17 bombers drop 700 bombs on Vemork. The plant is damaged but not destroyed. Worse, many Norwegian civilians die. Finally, in February 1944, Norwegian resistance fighters sabotage the ferry carrying the last stocks of heavy water to Germany. The ferry sinks in Lake Tinn, 400 feet deep. 14 Norwegian civilians drown, a price the resistance considers worth paying to deny Hitler the bomb. But while the Allies celebrate disrupting German efforts, Los Alamos faces its own crisis that threatens to derail everything. Summer 1944. Emilio Segre makes a terrifying discovery. Plutonium from the Hanford reactors contains an isotope, plutonium-240, that nobody expected in such quantities. Pu-240 fissions spontaneously, releasing neutrons at random. Put too much plutonium together too slowly, and it will begin reacting before reaching critical mass. Instead of an explosion, you get what they call a fizzle, a very expensive firecracker. The gun-type design they've been developing, shooting one piece of plutonium into another, is too slow. By the time the pieces come together, spontaneous fission will blow them apart. Months of work, useless. The entire plutonium production program, billions of dollars, the Hanford reactors, everything, might be wasted. Oppenheimer calls an emergency meeting. The only solution is implosion, using conventional explosives to compress a plutonium sphere to critical density. But this is like trying to squeeze a water balloon uniformly from all directions simultaneously. The slightest asymmetry and the plutonium squirts out instead of compressing. Seth Nettermeyer has been working on implosion, but progress is slow. Oppenheimer brings in George Kistiakowsky, an explosives expert and Russian exile who learned his craft fighting the Bolsheviks. John von Neumann applies his mathematical genius to calculating shockwave propagation. They need to create explosive lenses, shaped charges that will turn a spherical detonation wave into one that converges perfectly on the plutonium core. The complexity is staggering. 32 detonation points must fire within a millionth of a second of each other. The explosive lenses must be machined to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. The plutonium core must be perfectly spherical. Any imperfection will cause asymmetric compression. By December 1944, they're working 20-hour days. Feynman's wife is dying of tuberculosis in Albuquerque, and he bikes back and forth when he can. Scientists sleep on cots in their labs. The technical area looks like a kicked anthill, with physicists, chemists, metallurgists, and engineers racing between buildings with barely controlled panic. While Los Alamos races to solve implosion, another drama unfolds in Europe. The Alsos mission, scientific intelligence attached to the advancing Allied armies, hunts for traces of the German atomic program. The mission's leader is Colonel Boris Pash, a former San Francisco police officer who speaks fluent Russian and has a talent for intimidation. The scientific chief is Samuel Goudsmit, a Dutch physicist whose parents were murdered at Auschwitz. He has personal reasons for wanting to beat the Nazis. November 15, 1944, Strasbourg falls to Allied forces. Goudsmit rushes to the university, specifically to Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker's office. The Germans tried to burn their documents, but in their haste, they've left crucial papers behind. Reading through the singed pages, Goudsmit makes two discoveries, one reassuring, one terrifying. The reassuring news: German calculations show they think tons of uranium are needed for a bomb, not kilograms. They've made a fundamental error. The terrifying news: they're still actively working. The program has moved to southern Germany, to a town called Heigerloch. But there's a new fear. The Soviets are advancing from the east, and they want atomic secrets too. If Soviet forces capture German scientists or materials first, Stalin could gain years of research overnight. The race is no longer just about beating Germany, it's about keeping atomic secrets from the Soviets. In Germany, Heisenberg makes a fateful decision. With Allied bombs falling on Berlin daily, he moves the reactor project to Heigerloch, a picturesque town in the Swabian Alps, seemingly forgotten by the war. In a cave beneath the town church, they construct their most ambitious reactor yet, B8. The design is clever but primitive compared to American reactors. Uranium cubes hang on chains, submerged in heavy water. If it works, it will produce neutrons, prove chain reaction is possible, and potentially produce plutonium. But Heisenberg has made that crucial error. He's calculated the critical mass wrong, off by a factor of 10. He believes making a bomb requires resources Germany no longer has. Whether this is incompetence or subtle sabotage, we'll never know for certain. After the war, he'll claim he never wanted to give Hitler atomic weapons. His assistants will say he simply made a mistake. What we do know is that in early 1945, as American forces cross the Rhine and Soviet armies approach Berlin, Heisenberg is still tinkering with his reactor, still short of uranium, still waiting for heavy water that will never come. March 1945. Franklin Roosevelt is dying, though few know it. Harry Truman, the vice president, hasn't even been told about the Manhattan Project. In Los Alamos, the implosion design is finally working in tests. Oak Ridge has produced enough U-235 for one gun-type bomb. Hanford has made enough plutonium for at least 2 implosion bombs. But nobody knows if they'll actually work. The gun-type design is simple enough that they're confident without testing. But implosion? That needs a full-scale test. They're planning for July in the New Mexico desert. Codename Trinity, April 12, 1945. Roosevelt dies. Truman learns about the atomic bomb from Secretary of War Henry Stimson. Within 4 months, Stimson tells him, we shall in all probability have completed the most terrible weapon ever known in human history. April 30th, 1945. Hitler commits suicide in his Berlin bunker. Germany's surrender is days away. But in the Pacific, military planners estimate invading Japan will cost 1 million American casualties. The bombs being assembled in Los Alamos might make that invasion unnecessary. As spring turns to summer in 1945, 2 races are ending. The race against Germany is won. Pasch will soon descend those steps in Haigerloch and confirm the German program never came close. But a new race is beginning, against time, against the Soviets, and against the moral implications of what they've created. The scientists at Los Alamos have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They've turned Einstein's elegant equation into a weapon of unimaginable destruction. In a few weeks, they'll test it in the New Mexico desert. And then the world will never be the same. The atomic age is about to dawn, born from the parallel struggles of 2 nations, 2 scientific cultures, 2 visions of the future. One vision failed in a cave beneath a German church. The other is about to light up the sky brighter than 1,000 suns. April 23rd, 1945. Dawn breaks over the Swabian Alps in southern Germany. The war has 8 days left to live, though nobody knows it yet. Colonel Boris Pasch and his Alsos team surround the small town of Haigerloch like wolves closing on prey. Their target, Werner Heisenberg and the last remnants of Nazi Germany's atomic program. Pasch finds Heisenberg at home, sitting at his piano. The physicist seems almost relieved. I have been expecting you, he says in accented English. He's packed a small bag, as if preparing for a vacation rather than captivity. His calm is unnerving. Does he know something the Americans don't? In the cave beneath the Schlosskirche, Pasch's team discovers the B8 reactor. It's both impressive and pathetic. Impressive because these scientists, working in isolation, with minimal resources while their country collapsed around them, built something that might have worked. Pathetic because compared to the massive reactors at Hanford, each the size of a building, this device looks like a high school science project. The reactor consists of 664 uranium cubes, each about 2 inches across, hanging on chains like a deadly chandelier. The whole apparatus is suspended over a tank meant to hold heavy water, except there isn't enough heavy water. There was never enough heavy water. The Norwegian saboteurs and Allied bombers saw to that. Samuel Goudsmit arrives within hours. The Dutch physicist examines the reactor with professional interest and personal satisfaction. The parents he'll never see again, murdered at Auschwitz, are somehow vindicated by this moment. Nazi Germany will fall without ever achieving the weapon that might have saved it. But as Goudsmit reads through the documents scattered around the laboratory, his satisfaction turns to concern. The Germans understood more than Allied intelligence believed. They knew about plutonium. They had designs for uranium enrichment. They'd calculated bomb dynamics. Their fatal error wasn't ignorance. It was a single miscalculation and lack of resources. Heisenberg's crucial mistake becomes clear in his notes. He calculated the critical mass of uranium-235 at several tons, when the actual figure is about 50 kilograms, 100 times less. This error, whether honest or deliberate, meant he told Nazi leadership that building a bomb would require impossibly vast resources. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. But here's what chills Goudsmit. If Heisenberg had gotten the calculation right, if Germany had started with the same urgency as America, if they hadn't expelled their Jewish scientists, the documents suggest they were 2 to 3 years behind, not the decades Allied intelligence had hoped. 2 years. In the scope of history, that's nothing. In the context of war, it's everything. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. In Los Alamos, the scientists barely pause to celebrate. The bomb they're building was always meant for Germany, but Germany is gone. Now it will be used against Japan, a country that never had an atomic program, never came close to this particular horror. Some scientists argue the work should stop. The threat is over, but momentum has its own logic. $2 billion spent. 3 years of crushing work, a weapon that could end the Pacific War and save hundreds of thousands of American lives. The project continues, accelerating toward its terrible conclusion. Leo Szilard, the man who first conceived the chain reaction, circulates a petition. Don't use the bomb without warning. Demonstrate it for Japanese observers. Give them a chance to surrender. 70 scientists sign it. The petition never reaches President Truman. Meanwhile, in a country house called Farm Hall in England, 10 German nuclear scientists are being held in comfortable captivity. The British have bugged every room, recording everything. Heisenberg, Hahn, von Weizsäcker, and the others believe they're waiting to be recruited for Allied science projects. They have no idea they're being kept from Soviet hands and studied like laboratory specimens. They spend their days playing chess, tending the garden, giving lectures to each other on quantum mechanics. Otto Hahn is depressed, haunted by what his discovery of fission has led to. The others try to cheer him up, reminding him that they failed to build a bomb. Germany's failure is their moral salvation, they tell themselves. July 16, 1945, 5:29:45 a.m. Jornada del Muerto Desert, New Mexico. The Spanish name means Journey of the Dead Man, prophetic for what's about to happen. 20 miles away, scientists lie on the desert floor, welding goggles protecting their eyes. Some have placed bets on the yield. Edward Teller has covered himself in sunscreen, worried about radiation. Enrico Fermi tears up pieces of paper, ready to drop them when the shock wave arrives. From their drift, he'll calculate the yield. At base camp, Oppenheimer clutches a metal pole, his face gaunt from tension and sleeplessness. He's lost 30 pounds in the last few months. General Groves stands beside him, massive and immovable, annoyed that Oppenheimer seems so nervous. "What if it doesn't work?" Oppenheimer had asked. "Then you'll go back to Berkeley and I'll go back to Washington," Groves replied, "and we'll both be answering some very unpleasant questions." The countdown reaches 0. For a fraction of a second, nothing. Then the desert turns white, a light brighter than the sun, bright enough to see the bones in your hand like an X-ray, bright enough to blind a person looking directly at it from 10 miles away. The mountains miles distant stand out in stark relief, every detail visible in the artificial dawn. Then the fireball rises, a bubble of superheated gas expanding at millions of degrees, turning the desert sand beneath to green glass. They'll call it trinitite, radioactive jewelry from humanity's first nuclear explosion. The fireball rises, orange and red and purple, swelling like some mythological demon breaking free from the earth. The shock wave arrives 40 seconds later at base camp. The sound is beyond sound. It's a physical force that knocks some observers down. Windows break 120 miles away. A blind woman asks what that bright light was. The mushroom cloud rises 8 miles into the sky, its top spreading out in the stratosphere like an umbrella opening over the world. In that moment, everyone watching knows, this is not just another weapon. This is a fundamental change in the human condition. Oppenheimer, the Sanskrit scholar, thinks of the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds." Kenneth Bainbridge, the test director, is more prosaic. "Now we are all sons of bitches." The yield, 20 kilotons. 20,000 tons of TNT equivalent from a sphere of plutonium the size of a softball. It worked. God help us all, it worked. 3 weeks later, the USS Indianapolis delivers atomic bomb components to Tinian Island in the Pacific. Days after that, a Japanese submarine sinks the Indianapolis. Most of her crew dies in the water, eaten by sharks or drowning. The men who delivered the atomic age never see its conclusion. August 6, 1945, 8:15 a.m. local time. The Enola Gay, a B-29 named after pilot Paul Tibbets's mother, releases a single bomb over Hiroshima. Little boy, the gun-type uranium bomb, so simple they never tested it. 43 seconds later, at an altitude of 1,900 feet, it detonates. Hiroshima disappears, not gradually, not partially. In an instant, the city center simply ceases to exist. Humans become shadows burned into concrete. Birds ignite in mid-flight. The blast wave travels at 2 miles per second, crushing everything in its path. Fires merge into a firestorm that creates its own weather system. Tornado force winds feeding the flames. 70,000 die instantly. By year's end, radiation and burns will double that number. In Tokyo, Japanese leadership can't believe the reports. One bomb, one plane, impossible. They send investigators who return with horrifying news. It's true. Everything they understood about war has changed, but Japan doesn't surrender. August 9th, 1945. Fat Man, the implosion plutonium bomb, twin to the Trinity device, falls on Nagasaki. The hills around the city contain the blast somewhat, but 40,000 die immediately, 70,000 by year's end. Still, the Japanese war cabinet deadlocks on surrender. It takes Emperor Hirohito's unprecedented intervention to break the tie. On August 15th, his voice, never before heard by common Japanese, crackles over radios across the nation. Japan will bear the unbearable and surrender. The atomic age has begun with 250,000 dead. August 6, 1945 evening. Farm Hall, England. Major Terence Rittner informs Otto Hahn that the Americans have dropped an atomic bomb on Japan. Hahn is devastated. "I am responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of people," he says. His colleagues spend the night on suicide watch. The hidden microphones record everything. At first, the Germans don't believe it. Karl von Weizsäcker insists it must be propaganda. Heisenberg calculates on the back of an envelope. No, impossible. You'd need tons of uranium. But as details emerge, they're forced to accept the truth. The Americans succeeded where they failed. The recordings capture their shock, their excuses, their gradual realization of how wrong they'd been. How did they separate the isotopes? Heisenberg wonders aloud. They must have had 10,000 scientists working on it, says von Weizsäcker. No, says Heisenberg, beginning to understand. They had our scientists, the ones we drove out. It's true, the Manhattan Project succeeded not just because of American industrial might, but because of the genius Hitler expelled. The roster of refugee scientists reads like an indictment of Nazi racial policy. Einstein, whose letter started it all. Leo Szilard, who conceived the chain reaction. Enrico Fermi, whose reactor proved it possible. Hans Bethe, who calculated the bomb's efficiency. Edward Teller, already designing the hydrogen bomb. John von Neumann, whose mathematical brilliance solved the implosion problem. And dozens more. Eugene Wichner, Stanislaw Ulam, George Kistiakowsky, James Frank, Felix Bloch, Emilio Segre. The very scientists who might have given Germany the bomb first had Germany not declared them subhuman. The irony is absolute. Hitler's racial hatred defeated itself. By driving out Jewish physics, he handed his enemies the weapon that, had he possessed it, might have saved his Third Reich. The Manhattan Project transforms American science permanently. Before the war, American physics was provincial, looking to Europe for leadership. After the war, America becomes the world's scientific superpower. Los Alamos becomes a permanent laboratory. Oak Ridge continues enriching uranium. Hanford keeps producing plutonium. The infrastructure built for war becomes the foundation for the nuclear age. Power plants, nuclear medicine, the nuclear navy. The organizational model spreads everywhere. Big science is born, massive government-funded projects bringing together thousands of scientists and engineers. The National Laboratory System, NASA's moonshot, the Interstate Highway System. Even the internet decades later will follow the template the Manhattan Project created. Government funding, university research, private industry manufacturing, all coordinated toward a single goal. The refugee scientists become American scientific royalty. They lead universities, win Nobel Prizes, train the next generation. Their students go on to build Silicon Valley, to decode DNA, to invent lasers and transistors and computers. The brain drain Hitler caused becomes America's brain gain, a gift that keeps giving through generations. But in those captured German documents, in Heisenberg's miscalculations, in the farm hall recordings, we see the shadow of a different world. What if Germany had gotten the math right? What if they'd started 2 years earlier? What if they'd kept their Jewish scientists? Military historians have gamed it out. A German bomb in 1944 might have stopped the D-Day invasion. One atomic weapon could have destroyed the entire Allied fleet. Or they might have obliterated London, forcing Britain to negotiate. Moscow was within bomber range. Stalin's government could have been decapitated. Even a German bomb in early 1945 might have changed everything. Hitler spoke constantly of miracle weapons that would turn the tide. One atomic weapon on advancing Soviet armies might have forced a separate peace, leaving Germany in control of much of Europe. But it didn't happen. It couldn't happen. Not because German scientists sabotaged the program, as some claimed after the war. Not because Germans were technically inferior. They'd pioneered rocketry, jet engines, and numerous other innovations. It failed because of the fundamental contradiction of Nazi ideology. You cannot lead in modern physics while rejecting the Jewish theory of relativity. You cannot win a technological war after expelling your best technologists for their race. The German atomic program failed because totalitarianism, for all its ability to mobilize resources, cannot compete with democracy's ability to harness diverse talents toward a common goal. At Los Alamos, Hungarian Jews worked alongside German Gentiles, Italian Catholics beside American Protestants, all united not by race or ideology, but by shared purpose and scientific truth. Today, tourists visit Trinity Site twice a year when the military opens it to the public. They stand at Ground Zero, where the tower holding the first atomic bomb once stood, now marked only by a modest obelisk. The Trinitite is mostly gone, collected by souvenir hunters before the Army realized it was radioactive and banned removal. At Los Alamos, the laboratory continues its work, though now much of it involves maintaining the nuclear arsenal rather than building new weapons. The town is no longer secret. You can find it on any map, visit its museums, eat at its restaurants. In Heigerloch, the cave where Heisenberg's reactor stood is now the Atomkeller Museum. School children tour where the Third Reich's atomic dreams died. A plaque in German and English explains what happened here, carefully, neutrally, as if describing ancient history rather than events within living memory. Otto Hahn, after the war, became a passionate opponent of nuclear weapons. He refused to work on them, spoke against them, won the Nobel Prize for discovering fission, and used his platform to warn against what he'd helped unleash. He died in 1968, never forgiving himself for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Heisenberg returned to Germany, rebuilding German physics from the ashes. He never stopped claiming he deliberately slowed the Nazi bomb program, though the evidence suggests simple error rather than sabotage. He died in 1976, his motivation still debated. Oppenheimer, hailed as the father of the atomic bomb, later opposed the hydrogen bomb and lost his security clearance during the McCarthy era. The man who'd given America ultimate power was deemed untrustworthy because of his left-wing past. He spent his final years at Princeton, directing the Institute for Advanced Study, haunted by what he'd created. The physicists have known sin, he said, and this is a knowledge they cannot lose. History pivots on moments, small decisions that cascade into world-changing consequences. Heisenberg's miscalculation, the Norwegian commando's success, Szilard's traffic light inspiration, Einstein's letter. Each of these might have gone differently, and we would live in an unrecognizably different world. The German atomic program failed not because of sabotage, as Heisenberg later claimed, but because of arrogance, lack of resources, and crucial errors. The Nazi ideology that drove the program also doomed it, expelling the very minds that might have made it succeed. Yet those captured documents in Heigerloch revealed an unsettling truth. They were closer than we thought. Not 6 months from a bomb, as panicked Allied assessments suggested, but perhaps 2 years. In war, 2 years is eternity. In history, it's a heartbeat. The American scientists, many of them refugees from the very tyranny they helped defeat, gave democracy the ultimate weapon first. They worked not for conquest but for survival, not for racial supremacy but for human dignity. In that gap between almost and achieved lies the world we know today, flawed, dangerous, but existing. The atomic age that dawned in the New Mexico desert was born from the collision of German theoretical brilliance and American practical genius, European scientific tradition and American industrial power, refugee desperation and democratic determination. It gave us the Cold War, but also the longest period without major power conflict in modern history. It gave us nuclear weapons, but also nuclear medicine. It gave us the threat of annihilation, but also the technologies that define modern life. In the end, the race for the atomic bomb wasn't just about who could build the biggest weapon. It was about which vision of humanity would shape the future, one based on racial hatred and conquest, or one based, however imperfectly, on freedom and diversity. That the right side won was not inevitable. It took the combined efforts of 130,000 Americans and dozens of refugee scientists to achieve in 3 years what German arrogance couldn't accomplish in 6. The margin was narrower than we like to remember. The consequences of failure were greater than we can imagine. And the world we live in today, nuclear armed but not nuclear destroyed, exists because at the crucial moment, the right people were in the right place with the right values and the determination to see them through. That's the real legacy of the Manhattan Project. Not just the bomb, but the proof that democracy, for all its chaos and inefficiency, can accomplish miracles when survival is at stake. It's a lesson worth remembering in our own uncertain times, when new technologies pose new existential questions and the margin between triumph and catastrophe remains as narrow as ever. The atomic age began with a flash of light in the desert 78 years ago. We're still living in its shadow, still grappling with its implications, still hoping that the species that was smart enough to split the atom will be wise enough to survive it. Time will tell.